Okay, people. Um, this is the French whore, the Peugeot Wagon 505, if you didn't know that already, that left me stranded. Will it ever run and drive again? Uh, the question to that is yes. It was never in doubt. I kind of figured out, even before popping the hood, what happened. The tach dropped immediately, so I knew it was a ignition problem. And what I mean by that, Peugeot on the XM series. This is the fuel-injected 1.9 Hemi pushrod engine that was mainly sold in the United States. And the reason for that is in Europe, you not only got charged for engine displacement, this engine went down to like something like 1,500 cc's in its original format with 3 main bearings, and in the 60s it was upgraded to a 5 main bearing engine. But the reason the U.S. was mostly the consumer of the Bosch continuous injection system power plant is in Europe. You not only got taxed for engine size heavily, but you also got taxed for more power. And the fuel injected version, with the exception of the double carbureted XN6 um, Europe version, it made more power than this one. But in Europe, if you had the gumption to just pay the other taxes, the European version made 20 more horsepower than the American version. This only makes 96 horsepower at the flywheel, and I believe it's 127 foot-pounds at the flywheel, a little over $3,000. It's a gas miser because small displacement. What left me stranded? This little doohickey right here. This is a bolt-on General Motors HEI ignition system. For the folks that are familiar with HEI, it's a common component on General Motors products. And a lot of people that put on those goofy boxes to make their GM products go faster. I'm sure you've seen those things, red boxes, MSD ignition and everything. This General Motors Performance Goodwrench product actually makes more spark at a varying RPM range and temperatures than all those goofy boxes you see that people put on their Chevrolets, Pontiacs, Buicks, Oldsmobiles, etc. It can still be purchased at your Chevrolet dealership or any Goodwrench parts store. It's been available since the 1960s, and few people have ever purchased it because it's not red and it doesn't look, well, the saying about people with have Jeeps, full-size trucks that put big tires on them, they're trying to overcompensate. It probably runs along that line. What happened, as I explained, is the tach dropped, so I knew that it was some sort of ignition problem. And this ignition system is very simple. It's got here. We'll unplug it right now. We'll try to. Hold on. Okay, I just unplugged it. There's only 2 wires. You got a capacitor here, which maintains the voltage from the battery while it's running or not. And it goes into the coil. And it runs a Bosch General Motors Hall effect distributor, which allows it to advance and retard in correlation with the Bosch Jetronic computer, so it can play with the timing. Bulletproof design. Crazy if you think Bosch and General Motors. You'd never think of something. Well, a lot of car manufacturers, they have no problem sharing components in engineering when it suits both their advantages. What happened was, when I got out of the car, which originally was going to start as a video of me driving the car on the unpaved road around here, and the car quit after about 5 minutes. So I got out of the car, and First thing I did was I pulled the coil wire off right here, found a screwdriver on the floorboard of the car, and put it up there, but not touching the manifold so it could jump. And I was getting no spark. But I did notice that the fuel injection frequency valve, this is mechanical fuel injection, externally mounted, unlike the more common earlier version, which you could get on the Peugeot, but was most prolific on the BMW 2002 Ti. It used a KKK, yes, 3 Ks, mechanical fuel injection pump, like a diesel engine. And it had the 4 lines going out to the injectors, had a cold start injector, and it had pop-off valves and other features to allow cold start and warm start drivability accommodation, shall we say. But this is a Bosch Jetronic continuous injection, meaning the fuel, which comes from 2 pumps. There's a primer pump in the gas tank, and then there's a high pressure pump, which is located underneath the where you sit in the back on the driver's side, in the back seat under the floor. And high pressure fuel comes in here and swirls around at about 150 psi. And there is a pop-off valve, which pops at about 100 to 125, depending on temperature and fuel density, and it just goes straight back to the pump. So the fuel distributor always has an ample supply of fuel when you push the fun pedal to the floor or whatever. But the frequency valve, I don't know if you can see it. It's that CAD gold-looking item down there. It's actually, that's not it. That's a protective cover in case of a crash, to keep it from, getting compromised and spilling fuel inside the car. So obviously the German and French engineers knew what they were doing as far as safety. But that frequency valve, which actually operates the fuel delivery at idle and low engine speeds, it was going bzz, bzz, bzz. And I thought, well, that's kind of wacky. But then I got thinking again, like, oh, this is a dead one that came off the car. This is a General Motors transistor that actually sets your spark. It's kind of like, that's why they call it a transistor. It replaced points, so you don't have to worry. It's maintenance free. But this also trips the frequency valve. And I knew there was something wonky because that shouldn't have been working unless something was going on here really wonky. And it definitely was wonky because when I checked the temperature of this, it was very, very hot. And during normal usage, it should get just, very warm, maybe a little uncomfortable to the touch, because this is a heat sink after all. It's meant to take the heat generated by the transistor and transfer it to the aluminum case. And it didn't take a brain surgeon to figure out. And with a car like this, with only 1,500 registered in the United States, it's probably one of the rarest mass-produced cars, rarer than a Ferrari in the U.S., believe it or not. I always keep spares, and this is an older version from like 80 through 84 505 sedan. The same one, although they did make some differences. So I just changed it out and turned the ignition on, did my test, got spark. The frequency valve for the fuel injection was not doing its little stuff it wasn't supposed to be doing. Mainly, it shouldn't have been operating with the engine not spinning over. And it all worked out. So, yes, the car runs and drives again. The car is very reliable. I've had some issues develop since I've had it, which is 15 plus years now. The cold start valve, which creates a deliberate vacuum leak, for in the morning to keep the revs up high. It was leaking. It sits right here, just a valve. It creates a vacuum leak. I had to disconnect that. I believe the pigtail for it is right here. That's for the cold start valve. And the timer for the cold start injection in the morning. As a cold start injector, this timer is no good, and I've been not lucking out as far as finding one that works off of a Volkswagen or a Saab or French horse, shall we say. This is a cold start injector. See this little blue thing right here? Let me put my finger on it. You can see that. Yeah, you can see the Bosch quick disconnect. There's the cold start right there. That's the 5th injector, but that only works with a timer in it in relationship to engine temperature. So it should only come on when it's running properly, when it's cold, the engine. And I think that's about it, but I've got a jumper wire on that until I can find a timer. It gives the engine a little help. A lot of people, so-called auto technicians and mechanics, they can't stand the system because it's so-called over-engineered and complicated. It really isn't, and if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty, sometimes you should say what needs to be said. There are a lot of insolent and stupid people that work on cars or call themselves, mechanics, which they're not. It's a pretty simple system. CIS stands for Continuous Injection System, and I think I explained to you the frequency valve. It sets off the injectors. There are no electro valves for the injectors. The injectors swirl are fed fuel by the fuel swirling around the chamber, and the frequency valve does its thing along with the transistor, the igniter, which it's also called. After it gets the appropriate fuel pressure, it just swirls in firing order. The firing order in this engine is 1, 3, 4, 2. Yes, Peugeot counts the back cylinder near the flywheel as number 1 cylinder, whereas most car manufacturers will count the forward one as number 1 cylinder, but French being French, well, that is the case. And it just fires up in succession as far as the fuel comes up to the upper chamber and pops up a little spring pressure regulator and sends fuel to 1, 3, 4, 2, and that's it. It's a very simple system. It can be run without a computer. The computer is mainly for better fuel economy at lower RPMs and to meet emission standards. How it works is, as far as being defeated, you can actually just put a red wire down there to the positive wire that pulsates. And you've got a continuous injection system that goes all the time. But when it's running fine, normally, you see this micro switch here? A lot of cars then and now have them. See about, we'll say, 1/8, 1/4 power. It runs this into standby mode. Another thing that also does is the fuel pressure regulator. When this kicks off like that, the fuel pressure goes back up to the highest fuel pressure because the fuel pressure regulator actually is used to bring down the idle once the engine warms up, and it works just on a simple diaphragm from the engine block, and that's why the fuel pressure regulator is mounted on the engine block. Does that make sense? There's nothing high-tech about it. You've got the coolant temperature senders right here for this, the cold start valve, the cold start injector, and to operate the pulsed air injection, which is right here. It doesn't have, this car has no smog. It wasn't required to because it's a real Hemi. It's not a fake Hemi or a semi-Hemi. This engine combusts fuel so well because it's a true Hemi. It needs no smog because it needed no smog beyond the catalytic converter because there are hardly any hydrocarbon emissions when it's done burning the fuel. And to clean things up at idle for the state of California and other states, it just use a bypass pulse air injection, which creates a lean mixture. It just pulses straight air into the intake bellow. It does create some drivability issues every once in a while if you've got your fuel mixture set a little too low, because the way this system works, it works on vacuum as far as the fuel distributor. If you have a vacuum leak in this car or any other car like a Volkswagen, Mercedes, Saab, a Volvo, Ferrari, Rolls-Royce, etc., any European manufacturer that used Bosch continuous injection system, externally mounted, not a mechanical pump, it's the smooth operation is dependent on zero vacuum leaks. So let's say I took off this fuel evaporative charcoal canister line. I would have problems with the drivability at idle, because what happens is the engine vacuum, it in itself, it brings up a plunger, which acts on the metering rod here inside the fuel distributor. And that's what sends a larger quantity of fuel to your injectors. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, the car is fixed. My only concerns right now are, where am I going to get another General Motors HEI transistor? And I don't trust anything on the internet because, folks, sorry to maybe bust your bubble, but if you go to a brick and mortar store like Napa or O'Reilly's or CarQuest, etc., AutoZone, the box or the package wrapped in cellophane may say made in the USA, but more times than not, we got to be careful what we say, but it's usually made in a country that rhymes with another country, per se, Guyana. So if you can think of the other country that rhymes with that country, Guyana, yeah. So worst case scenario, I'll just go to a Chevy dealership and check the package and make sure this is made in the USA, because all my decades of working on cars previously, I've only seen a handful of these ever go bad. I saw one go bad on a Peugeot 505 STI, I think it was an 83 or 84, and a few of the Chevy trucks that we used to work on for one of our customers that ran a fleet of Chevy pickups and Chevy G-Vans, but they don't go out very often, and I like to keep that the way it is by making sure I get transistor that's made in the USA or Canada or Mexico. So be careful about that when you order parts for your vehicle, because you're not always getting what you think you're getting. As far as if the box even says it's made in the USA, it's not. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, the only modifications I've done to this car, I put in American cruise control. The Bosch Hella cruise controls, yes, Hella with two L's and an A. They're kind of slow, so I put this in when I first got the car because American cruise control. There's some things we do well, not much, but we do cruise control well. So this is an American cruise control. I just mounted to the park neutral safety switch bracket. No holes were cut. Just use the existing stuff to do what you need to do, and you just kind of hook the little bracket here on the throttle. One major thing I've done is the alternator. I do not trust Bosch, Paris Rome, or Motorola alternators. They don't make as much voltage or amps as the good old-fashioned General Motors alternator. When I got this, which is about Shortly after I got the car, a few years later, I had to replace the front bearing. In the back, it has a bearing, but it's open, just needle bearing, so you just pack it with a little bit of wheel bearing grease or whatever floats your boat. No wires were cut as far as making a Chevy alternator work on the Peugeot. Just hook up the battery wire, which comes from the starter, to the General Motors one, and the light on the General Motors pigtail. You can see it's just hooked directly to the female idiot light wire. So you don't have to do stupid stuff to get intended results, shall we say. So what I've learned from myself and other people, when they start customizing and whatever you want to call it, you end up regretting it down the line as far as that kind of stuff. So no need to cut and drill. Since this has one of the worst, most horrific transmissions from that time period, and still, it's got a ZA4H22 with a 33% overdrive. I do run a Chrysler minivan. If you can see it, it's a Chrysler minivan transmission cooler. I've used the existing holes on the radiator core support and had to make a little bracket here to make it work, but no holes were cut, so the paint and the corrosion prevention were not compromised. And I do run a Hayden electric fan, which I've never had a problem with. It's the biggest one I could get when I got the car, because this Peugeot uses an electromagnetic fan, and I'm always been a klutz, even more since the wreck as far as hand-eye, but this is the electromagnetic mechanism, and it's operated by engine temperature, the sending unit right here. You can see where the wires for the fan are. That's the same sending unit that would send 12 volts to this electromagnetic clutch, and the fan becomes a fixed fan, but they're noisy and they draw a lot of horsepower. And on this little hamster engine, every little bit you can use. If this engine seems foreign to you, it should not, because this was used heavily in the Chrysler Europe, brought over to America, and made in the USA, Dodge Omni and Plymouth Horizon, and the spin-offs like the pickup that was meant to compete with the VW Rabbit, and the wannabe 024, I think they called it, Turismo, Dodge Charger, variation of the old platform. The Horizons and the Dodge Omni use the 1.6 version of this engine. It's a very durable engine. It's made in an industrial fashion. It means if you wear the cylinder bores out to the point to where it's not worth or possible to re-ring it without, same thing happening again. This engine has no cylinder bores. It has liners like an industrial equipment. So if the engine gets so worn out, all you do is pop the head off, pull your liners out, and you buy a new set of liners and pistons, matched and weighed, of course, for balance. You can either get them from Peugeot or Caterpillar, because Caterpillar used this in a lot of their light industrial engines that were gas powered. So yeah, it's been a good little car all these years. Not too much. I don't think that's authorized by Peugeot, but I operate a slightly bigger battery. We can go out to the back, and you can see how I towed the Eagle with this car, as gutless as it is. This is a trailer hitch from a first generation VJ Grand Cherokee. I believe it was an aftermarket one. My dad initially helped me chop it down and tack weld it. He was having electrical problems at his house. He didn't like my welder, so I eventually took it to a welder to put on some safety welds, shall we say. Although my welds are probably okay, I don't trust them enough to do anything with it. But at the bolt on, bolt off, this little bar you see right here, I did this all on my own. It's actually thin gauge tubing, square tubing, as you can see. This keeps the trailer hitch from rocking on the crumple zones of the car. If you can see right there, the transition and the sheet metal frame rails. Um, this stuff is intentionally a lighter gauge than that, so the car will crumple up if you get rear-ended, because it's better that the car crumples up and takes some of the initial impact rather than your bones and your brain and internal organs. But yeah, it's 3 bolts for this anti-rocking deal here, and I've modified it to fit on the frame rails. You can see there. You don't have to build something crazy, as far as that kind of stuff. I did lose my exhaust system this past winter. I haven't gotten around to welding it because I'm going to end up putting a Toyota Camry. Yes, you heard that right. Fourth, fifth generation muffler up here to keep it out of the way, and reroute the hooping system because more than once this past winter, this car was completely buried up to the floorboard in this mud around here. It wasn't fun, and the sound the car made when my neighbor popped it loose with his bulldozer. Yeah, ever heard a car pop loose? Yeah. So yeah, probably not, the best place you'd want a gas tank, but since this is a station wagon, and it's nearly 20 gallons, this is the only place to put it. But it's protected well as far as distance from the rear axle and the panhard rod, and it's made out of plastic. And that's the 505's claim to fame. It's the first production, mass-produced car that had a plastic gas tank, and I only had it once out 10 years ago, to make sure everything was all right as far as contaminants. I put it in the bathtub and shower stall, shall we say, and cleaned it out really well, and there wasn't too much stuff in there as far as runners finish. So that all worked out. It was a lot easier cleaning out than the AMC Eagles tank, because the AMC Eagles tank didn't offer a whole lot of opportunity to get in there with your hand and with a rag or whatever, then a Scotch Brite and clean things up. But yes, it is a solid axle vehicle. If you can see, the axle is made entirely out of aluminum, and the center pumpkin disconnects from the axle ends. So if you ever have to replace the U-joint, this is torque tube drive, by the way. It doesn't have a conventional drive shaft. There's only one U-joint at the front. That's why it's called a banjo torque tube axle. It's very old school, but nothing can get inside, and it makes for a very light, unsprung weight. And if you've ever driven in a Mercedes-Benz W123 station wagon or a Volvo 240 or 700 and 900 series with independent suspension or solid axle, these things trump them, no problem. They ride so much better. And with those wagons, you can't put an 8-foot piece of plywood in the back with the seat all the way up. That'll never happen. So yeah, that's it for this installment. Hope that it was beneficial in some way. If not, well, you got some more eye candy, shall we say. And if you like this video, you can either like it or hit the not like button, or you can subscribe or not subscribe. Not forcing you to do anything. This video was not edited or scripted. I'm just kind of winging it. I think that's what works best as far as you're trying to bring a point across someone and you're not trying to sell them something. As far as that's not my intentions. This whole video making thing was done on a bet about 3 months ago, and I finally acted on it. And so yeah, I mean, I'm making videos. I have no problem being on camera as far as shooting my voice. Maybe you'll see my face, maybe you won't. I have limitations as far as video making right now, so if you stay with me, maybe I'll buy some more equipment and be able to take panoramic shots, because I'm having trouble with some camera viewpoint, shall we say. So I hope you have a great day. I hope you learned something. Yes, the Peugeot left me stranded for about 2 hours because it had its little mishap about 3/4 of a mile away from here, and I had to walk to and from the ranch 2 round trips with the raccoon dog. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know who the raccoon dog is. And yeah, so you just follow the simple formula of KISS. It's an acronym for Keep It Simple, Stupid. I wouldn't want a new car. I can afford a new car. I would not want a new car simply because they're not made as well. This thing has a little over 300,000 miles on it. It was used as a delivery vehicle for 20 years. I don't even want to know how many hours are on the engine with it idling. Um, it does have a crankshaft that's got a score on the bottom because when I first got this thing, it pissed oil like you would not believe. And so I just replaced the lateral seals. That's the only kind of seals it has for the rotating masses. It has no conventional rubber seals. It uses an Archimedes screw for the back when the oil wants to go out the engine, beyond the main lateral seal caps for the main bearings. The Archimedes screw does what it does. It flings the oil back inside the sump and towards the front of the car. And up front, it uses a whip and another Archimedes screw. So, yeah, it's a trip. Have a grand day, people, all right? Bye.